Welcome to Blessed Man Meditations. My name is Andy. On this YouTube channel, I offer thoughtful responses to skeptical objections to the Christian faith. I likewise edify the saints by equipping them to provide an answer for the hope that lies within them. I hope that you find value in my work. Please like my videos, send me comments, and please subscribe. Let's work together to contend earnestly for the faith that's been once for all delivered to the saints. Blessed Man Meditations is where we provide answers to the intellectual side of Christian belief and equip Christians to provide a defense for the hope that is in them, according to 1 Peter 3:15. Today on Blessed Man Meditations, we continue our look at the Eric Metaxas book, Is Atheism Dead? Eric Metaxas is a best-selling author whose books have been translated into 25 languages, the host of a nationally syndicated radio show and the acclaimed conversation series Socrates in the City. Metaxas is a prominent cultural commentator whose work has appeared in the New York Times, the New Yorker, the Atlantic, and the Wall Street Journal. He wrote an article sometime back that was in the Wall Street Journal about how science increasingly makes a case for the existence of God. You can look that article up. Today, we continue our look at part 1 of Is Atheism Dead, the part that answers the question, does science point to God? And today we're looking at chapter 8, where we look at more on the origins of life, and we ask the question, now what? Well, first is keep calm and follow the science. After facing this ocean of information against the idea that life might just have happened by random chance, or against the idea that life, the information that came out showed that the evidence was definitely pointed in the direction that life did not just happen by random chance. So most people would conclude that the only reasonable conclusion is that an incomprehensible intelligence was behind the origin of life. And the evidence that we have looked at in this book and elsewhere on this channel, and others who are much better apologists than me, they've shown, and I've attempted to show, that there is tons of information, even scientific information, scientific evidence that shows that life did not just happen, but that there is an incomprehensible intelligence behind it, a designer or creator of some kind. Some of us might not like to draw the conclusion that there's a designer or creator behind life, but should we not follow the logic nonetheless? Should we not follow the science where it leads, even if that makes us uncomfortable? If science and mathematics have led us inexorably more and more to this conclusion that there is a designer or creator behind life, why should we shrink from that knowledge? Are we not secure enough in the objectivity of science and mathematics to let them speak for themselves, even if what they say makes us uncomfortable? But many in the atheist camp have been less concerned with following the science than with avoiding any conclusion pointing to God, even if it makes them reach beyond science in other directions. For example, Francis Crick, the very man who discovered DNA's double helix, was only too happy to offer a theory on how he thought life had first appeared on our planet. Writing in the unintentionally tragicomically titled astronomy journal Icarus in 1973, Francis Crick theorized that perhaps aliens brought life to Earth. Apparently that seemed more rational than an all-powerful divine being outside of space and time, i.e. God. Crick would not say whether the aliens had traveled earthward or on waxen wings, and he did not footnote Erich von Däniken. If anyone was tempted to think he must be joking, Crick crowned his theory with the laurel wreath of an honorable scientific name. He called it directed panspermia. I believe that was mentioned in I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. But even if Crick's crackpot theory were somehow true, what would it have solved beyond kicking the can of this vital question down the road and beyond our solar system? If aliens really had brought life here, or had created life and brought it here, still the question would remain, how? how had they created life? That was the question on the table. And would it be too much to ask who it was that had created the brilliant aliens? Or had the aliens created themselves? If any of us had created life in a lab and then carried it down the hall to our supervisor, the question would never be what path had be taken to the lab to the supervisor's office. Tell us whether you took the elevator or the stairs. Not what sort of shoes we were wearing as we hustled our created life along the hallways. The question simply should have been, how have you created life? The claim is astonishing. Please tell us, how have you created life? There is no other question. How had you done the thing that no one has ever done or begin to do, or know how to begin to do in a way that gives us clues to how life could arise from non-life? Nobody, as Jim Tor repeatedly emphasizes, people don't know. They can't recreate it. How did you get life from non-life? How did you get from the non-living chemicals to life? There is no other question, and please show us your work. Holding bacteria in a test tube as you huff and puff from your journey to make the claim does not quite answer the question. So yes, we will need to see your work, and alas, if you cannot show your work, you will of course be suspected of fraud and probably lose your job and reputation forever. Indeed, even if you can show your work, there exists a custom in the scientific community in which one is obliged to repeat one's experiment numerous times to see whether the results can be duplicated. We know that Crick must have known something about the scientific method, having won a Nobel Prize in Science 16 years earlier, but it is never ill-advised to say what everyone is presumed to know, just so there's no embarrassing misunderstanding. But in retrospect, we must assume that Crick's noodlings in Icarus were a psychedelic-era hallucination only permitted to appear in the august pages of that journal because Crick, by dint of his worldwide fame and Nobel, had earned the right to sound preposterous and was accorded more latitude than non-Nobelists. But as we say, what he dared to suggest in his sunward flight of science-free fancy did not carry the question closer to any answer, but merely caused our hero to plummet embarrassingly into the Aegean, from which his aforementioned reputation would eventually fish him out. Yes, because he was a famous, notable scientist, the suggestion that aliens brought life to the planet did not ruin him, apparently. But such speculations are themselves evidence of how high atheists will fly to avoid the horror of science on the ground if its implications are unpalatable. Yes, they will suggest such ridiculous things as aliens. Somehow that's more rational than a creator god. Really? Francis Crick would have us believe that. So we must see irresponsible non-answers like directed panspermia as the obfuscating ink squirted by an escaping cephalopod in his furious undulation to safety from such vexing questions. Yes, directed panspermia was the preferred escape hatch to the return of the comfort of materialism instead of embracing the uncomfortable theism that is very obviously implicated in the evidence and scientific data around us. Somewhat happily, Crick was 8 years later rather more sober-minded than he had been in Icarus. An honest man, Crick wrote in 1981, armed with all the knowledge available to us now, could only state that in some sense the original life appears at the moment to be almost a miracle. Well, God's in the business of doing miracles, Mr. Crick. So many are the conditions which would have to have been satisfied to get it going. That's what Dr. James Tor keeps trying to say. The same thing that notable scientists such as Francis Crick say, that it takes a lot to get life going. And that materialism, thus far, has been inadequate at trying to explain it. Lost in space. In the 3 decades following Crick's late but nonetheless welcome admission, the evidence that the origin of life was a miracle and not possible in any other way had increased exponentially, as we have said. But this did not prevent the hopeful Richard Dawkins from circling back to the sunny skies over the Aegean. During an interview for the 2008 film Expelled, he allowed that, yes, the astonishing Baroque complexity of DNA might indicate a signature of some kind of designer, which initially sounded like the loud thunderclap of a concession. After all, had not he and many others insisted that we must never confuse the appearance of design with actual design? He said biology is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. So for him to talk about some kind of designer in a public interview was shocking. Was Dawkins at last open to discussing these things openly, unshackled from the strict atheist dogma that he holds to? Alas not. For Dawkins then qualified his statement into smithereens by stating that this designer could never be a divine designer. He did not say why that precise distinction must be made, nor by what standards, nor what by his standards constituted divinity. He would not say what made something divine, but when pressed to say more about what sort of designer he had in mind, Dawkins reached backward to the groovy solution proposed 35 years ago in Icarus, saying that perhaps it was extraterrestrial creatures who had done the designing. We're left to gather that, unfortunately, they had deposited their little designs here on Earth anonymously, like some untethered dog in the neighborhood. The idea of invented aliens giving us the gift of life from the heavens presented, he said, an intriguing possibility. That the world's most famous atheist would invent his own creation myth rather than accept the evidence of science bespeaks a faith in something far beyond science, and must be seen as an unmistakable betrayal of the science and reason whose praises he had so loudly sung. But his statements went quite unchallenged by the atheist scientists who looked to him as leader. Now we're going to look at how philosophical paradigm murders science. We conclude this chapter on a strange but telling note. It seems that scientists have again succumbed to the temptation to think unscientifically in what they believe, in what they believe us, the servants of science, but on what they believe is the service of science. Yes, they succumb to the temptation to think unscientifically in what they believe is the service of science, but of a philosophical ideology that is the enemy of science. Yes, their philosophical ideology that there can be no creator God, it actually prevents them from doing good science. Materialism, the idea that nothing beyond the material universe exists, implies that there is no God, that God does not exist. And Darwinian evolution has come to be a powerful idea for those ensorcelled by the siren song of materialism, because it puts forth a way of explaining how the variety of life on our planet can be explained with a naturalistic mechanism of self-selection, meaning without a creator God. But the idea of evolution has become so powerful that it's begun creeping into the world before life existed. When we talk of origin of life theories, we often use the term abiogenesis. The terms are used interchangeably and mean the same thing. The process by which elements of non-life somehow randomly come together to produce a living single-celled organism. But a surprisingly strange thing occurs when we look up abiogenesis in various dictionaries. For example, the Oxford Dictionary defines abiogenesis as the original evolution of life or living organisms from inorganic or inanimate substances. That's the Oxford Dictionary. See how they just smuggled the term evolution in there? Weren't we talking about a world before life existed? Of course we were. That's the point. Abiogenesis is supposed to be what happens before life, as non-life comes together to form life. But the term evolution has somehow been slipped in. How did that happen? How can we talk of evolution before we have life? Merriam-Webster, too, says abiogenesis is a theory in the evolution of early life on Earth. Organic molecules and subsequent simple life forms first originated from inorganic substances, end quote. Again, we're talking about evolution before life. How can we pretend that is possible? It's like talking of gestation before conception. Wikipedia is as well guilty of this shameful, disingenuous sleight of hand. Here's Wikipedia. While the details of this process are still unknown, it says, in great understatement, the prevailing scientific hypothesis is that the transition from non-living to living entities was not a single event, but an evolutionary process of increasing complexity that involved molecular self-replication, self-assembly, autocatalysis, and the emergence of cell membranes. But again, how can we possibly talk of an evolutionary process before there was life on the planet? Apparently, some people are so enamored of the idea of evolution, they've forgotten what it means. So they've tried to slip it into discussions where it has no business, as though talking of flatulence in the Van Allen belt. How could someone bring the term evolution into the discussion of a process where, by definition, there is no life and can be no mechanism for evolution? As we recall, the mechanism behind Darwinian theory is natural selection, or survival of the fittest. The idea is that as living organisms reproduce, those possessing some advantage will survive. Their genes will get passed on, while the genes of those organisms that don't do so well do not. So everyone understands that the theory of evolution, by definition, presupposes living organisms. So how can you have evolution if you don't yet have living organisms? As they reproduce through generations, we can see change via the natural selection of genes. This is the mechanism of evolution, and reproduction is crucial. And there can be no reproduction without life. It is one thing to discuss Darwin's theory and to believe that life forms can, over time, alter slightly via mutation or other means, and that those with advantages would self-select and survive beyond those without advantages. We've all heard tales or read in textbooks about how a certain animal better fitted to survive would survive, and it seems self-explanatory. If animals with longer necks could more easily reach the leaves they ate, then in time, the course of nature would favor those animals who would bear young with longer necks, and this process would continue, always favoring those with the longest necks, until eventually, over the course of millennia, we would have giraffes. Even if you don't agree that this is what happened, you can certainly grasp the idea and understand why most of the scientific establishment saw the theory as satisfactory for explaining many things. We can argue about evolution all day long, but before we can ever get to talking about what happened after the first life arose on our planet, we have to figure out how that life arose to begin with. And we know that if it happened, it cannot have had anything to do with evolution. So how do these three dictionary definitions of abiogenesis possibly excuse tossing that term into the mix? Can it be that everyone has been trained to nod in agreement at the concept of evolution, so that if we speak it into this conversation on abiogenesis, we can pretend that evolution extends everywhere, including into the world before life? The term evolution is often used sloppily, as when someone talks of the universe evolving, as though the lifeless rocks and balls of flaming gas and galaxies were somehow alive. But most people know the term evolving universe is meant metaphorically. But anyone using the term evolution in defining abiogenesis is certainly not being metaphorical. On the contrary, they deftly, and it appears dishonestly, implying that whatever magical process happens after we have life can somehow happen before we have life too, as though there's some innate universal principle at work. There's only one problem. When we do that, we've left the realm of science. So again, why would anyone use the term evolution in a definition of abiogenesis except because their materialist ideology is more important than the truth and clarity? Were they hoping to sneak something past their readers? Or did they really believe you could have evolution before life? Which is worse? In the strange and inaccurate use of this word in these definitions, the term evolution has moved beyond the idea of living creatures changing over time to become an entire paradigm, so that, like a miasma, it flowed in every direction and settled over everything, as though unconstrained by the laws of science. Suddenly, everything that changed over time could be spoken of as having evolved, even though this is obviously not true. But it seems that the giddiness over the concept of evolution overtook rationality and crept backward into the world before living organisms and then hid there, hoping we wouldn't notice. We don't know why the first living cells split into two and then reproduced, but we may agree that they did, and that reproduction was central to what we call life. It is what made it continue forward in time ad infinitum. But because of scientific progress, we know that nitrogen and hydrogen and silver and ammonia do not reproduce. Neither do amino acids or carbohydrates. Nor do any of these things eat or excrete or metabolize in any way. Only life does that. So how can non-life be said to evolve? It cannot. Non-life cannot be said to evolve. Unless one is being unintentionally sloppy in the service of a philosophical paradigm one thinks more important than actual science. Maybe it's more important to maintain the philosophical paradigm than it is to actually follow the science where it leads. So that's the end of part 1 of Is Atheism Dead by Eric Metaxas. Next time we will begin part 2 that says the stones will cry out. So thank you for tuning in to this episode of Blessed Man Meditations. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Please contact me about obtaining a copy of the published work, Pinnacles and Plateaus, Meditations with the Psalmist, if you do not see it available where books are sold online. And I hope you have a blessed rest of your day.